Happy Sunday evening. Sorry, it's not the smoke, it's actually I think more the hay fever, because the pollen count is really high around here at the moment. I do beg your pardon, I'm sorry. But because of the heat, I've got the back door open, the windows open, trying to get some air through. It's not so much the heat, it's the humidity. That's what's killing me at the moment. Anyway, enough of the weather report and the climatic conditions in my own particular part of southeast London. I've got another live album for you. It's not on vinyl, this one's on CD. But this has a special place in my heart because I was actually there when this was recorded. So if you listen to the applause, and if you can hear some running around and snapping of jaws off camera, Ziggy doesn't like flies. And so any fly that flies through the window, surprisingly enough, he goes berserk chasing it. So I do apologise for that. But yeah, I was at this concert. It was probably the second to last concert I ever went to. And this was recorded in October 2008. So I'm going to stick on the CD. Oh. King Goblin. Ooh, cheers.
So this song
Good
is
health.
for
Happy Sunday.
before they get drunk themselves. I could be a rambler from the 7.
Smoking the last of my Oliver cigars gifted by Tim, Wharf Valley boy. This is a Corona.
I don't do business that don't make me smile. I love my aeroplane because she got style. I'm a treetop lion.
This is Stephen Stills, live at Shepherd's Bush. This is a CD and a DVD of the concert, recorded in October 2008, and I was there. So if you listen carefully, it was a great gig, really was. I first got into Crosby, Stills and Nash. Well, I suppose they were Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young by the time I got into them. Because I've said before I was a heavy metal fan in my earliest days. And I went to see the movie Woodstock when it was released. 1969, 1970. I was blown away by Crosby, Stills and Nash doing Sweet Judy Blue Eyes. And for my own particular group here in the UK, that was a sort of a turning point. We'd all been into the hard rock. And suddenly we got into all this semi-acoustic, what we would call West Coast. I don't even know if they would be particularly described as West Coast, but yeah, semi-acoustic folk rock. Crosby, Stills, Nash and Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young were the top favourite. and I really loved them. I don't know if you can even hear this because it's only acoustic. Yeah, really loved them. Bought their albums, bought their solo albums. And of course, the two main players in the band were Stephen Stills and Neil Young. And I went on to be a massive Neil Young fan. I've got a huge catalogue of Neil Young stuff. And Stephen Stills, not so much. He was fairly overshadowed by Neil Young, I think. A great musician in his own right. But I never saw Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young live. And the first gig I ever went to where I saw even a member of the group live was this one. In October 2008, so 10 years ago this year. He did, the first half of the set was acoustic, the second half was electric. Both were absolutely amazing. He only played one night. And the Shepherd's Bush Empire is a pretty small venue, it only holds 2,000 max. So that's an example of how much his career and Neil Young's are diverse, because like Neil Young would be headlining festivals with tens of thousands, and Stephen Stills was playing a 2,000 capacity venue. But it was lovely because it was so intimate, it was so small. You can hear me clapping there.
You must know that we're filming. Can't be stiff in the old boy when he's on.
He was great though, really was.
So here's a song from back in my 20s, you know. I remember my 20s. For those of you who remember your 20s, not of them that I do remember. There was one point where I was going, oh me, oh I can't take it anymore. Oh, yeah, I'm going to be full of it. And I wrote a song about it. It got over. Yeah, like, bollocks. Get over yourself, mate. And but here's the song which everyone still curiously loves to hear. Maybe it's full with meaning. Or maybe it's because, well, I wrote that too.
He's a great guitarist.
I've left the words the same because, you know, 3 and 60 just doesn't sound right.
When I went to see this gig, he was the same age as I am now.
I look younger than I did a couple of years ago, I'll tell you that.
But yeah, absolutely amazing gig. So, if you fancy a bit of Stephen Stills, I highly recommend this. Really, really good album. This is a lovely song. For me, of course, it conjures up a lot of memories of the early days, the 70s in particular. And yeah, probably the second to last gig I ever went to. I think the last gig I ever went to was about 3 or 4 years later, when I went to the Albert Hall, of all places, to see Crosby, Stills and Nash. Now, what a transformation from this 2,000 venue, the Shepherd's Bush Empire, to going to the Albert Hall, which was a massive barn of a place. But I was very, very fortunate. I got a seat right at the side of the stage, and they put on a great show. They really did. And what I loved was it wasn't all just greatest hits. You know, they did their recent stuff as well, and it was really, really enjoyable. Great musicians, fantastic. Still never seen Neil Young live, despite having just about everything he's ever released.
Morning comes the
I had a chance a few years back when he did come to the UK, but as it turned out, I think I dodged a bullet, because Neil Young's a great songwriter, but like a lot of people from that area, he doesn't want to keep on. He doesn't want to be a jukebox churning out the greatest hits. And not only that, but he's much given occasionally to wigging out on 11-minute guitar solos with a lot of feedback. I'm the sad kind of fan that wants him to hear him do the stuff from the past. So cheers, I mentioned I'm drinking the old King Goblin. Happy Sunday. Thanks for your feedback on my last done. And also, one before, and also on the recommendation, it's still, my teeth aren't fitting properly. On the recommendation of a few people, I bought the Satcher Patchouli Forest, and I've been burning that, really enjoying it. It's definitely entered the favourites list. Although tucked inside the box was a free sample of something else. I haven't even burnt it yet, but I'm thinking I'm going to have to put it in a lead-lined casket. It's stinking the place out. But I'll give it a try.
Except for the accent, which nobody would ever be able to understand. Anyway, so
I like the fact that I was there and they've still included all the between songs chat. Not so much interest to anyone that wasn't there, I suppose. Now, I did books the other day and said that I'm not doing them in order. I'm not trying to compile a top 10, top 20. Just dipping in now and again. And I did Tom Wolfe, touched on Philip Roth, and did Cormac McCarthy, great author. So today I thought I'd just touch on the other side of the spectrum from American authors, which the last three I mentioned were, and not only go to the other side of the Iron Curtain, well, it was the other side of the Iron Curtain, but, you know, go back to Soviet authors. And mention my second favourite, not my favourite, which may be controversial for some, but my second favourite Soviet-Russian author. And of course it couldn't be anyone else except Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Very big to someone growing up in the 60s and 70s, because of course he featured in the news quite a lot as a dissident author. But he was a man who was a committed Marxist in his youth. And, you know, we tend to decry the Soviet Union, but it made a huge change. It transformed Russian society and the Soviet states from, yeah, they'd been ruled by this autocratic Tsar, and there'd been a great deal of repression. So the Russian Revolution was born out of a need. What it became is another matter altogether. Tap that ash off. And Alexander Solzhenitsyn, as I say, was a committed Marxist. He was born in 1918. And in the Second World War, he served with distinction in the Red Army in an artillery unit. He was twice decorated. But this is where the bad side of the Soviet Union came in, and particularly Stalinist Russia. Shortly before the war ended in Europe, he'd written a private letter to a friend, and he'd made what was considered to be disparaging remarks about the way Joseph Stalin had handled the war. And these were intercepted by the secret services. And this man that had served with distinction fighting for his country was arrested at the front.
taken to the notorious Lubyanka prison in Moscow and interrogated. And we can only imagine what that was like. And then in his absence was sentenced to 8 years in a labour camp, followed by internal exile. Difficult to imagine what that's like, you know, where you're not allowed freedom of expression. There's so many people in the world that still aren't allowed it. We take it for granted in the West, I think. But then he was released and went through his internal exile and then was slightly rehabilitated and went on. One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich. During the Soviet era, this was the only book of his that was published. And it was under the Khrushchev era, which was anti-Stalinist, of course. And it was actually, believe it or not, this was studied in schools. But then Khrushchev was ousted in 1964. And that period came to an end. And none of his books were published under the Soviet Union. They were published in the West because they were smuggled out. So much so that he was actually awarded a Nobel Prize for Literature in 1970. And then in 1974 he was kicked out of the Soviet Union and he emigrated to the West and ended up in the States. Now, he actually, although he lived in the States for a long time, he missed Russia so much. You'd miss your homeland. And when the Soviet Union came to an end, he moved back to Moscow and stayed there the rest of his life. Absolutely fantastic author. Not just his writing style, but of course the events he was recording. One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, of course, is set in a labour camp in the Gulag. But my next favourite, my second favourite of his, Cancer Ward. Absolutely incredible book, which documents his life because he was diagnosed with cancer. And that documents his experiences. It's a novel, but it's semi-autobiographical novel. Really, really fantastic book. But his number one, I'm going to have to jump to this because I'm waffling on and the time's gone so fast. My absolute favourite, the number one, is classic. In the First Circle. An absolute blinding Cold War classic. Once again set in the prison system, but this is more of less the labour camp and more of what was being done to counteract the threat from America. Great book, absolutely great book. I do apologise that my shirt's open, but it's so warm and humid here. So there you go. That's me at a gig of one of my musical heroes, and 3 books that I highly recommend. And I think you can read them now for historical interest, if nothing else, because they're incredibly well written, especially in the First Circle. Cheers all. I might be putting up some more this week. I'm going to be leading a pretty solitary existence over the next few weeks. My youngest daughter is doing her A-levels. I've mentioned these before. These are the exams that get you into university. And I've always stressed to her that she must, because up until now, she's always done a week with her mother, a week with me. always stressed to her, when it comes to her A-levels, you do what is best for you. And not surprisingly, she wants to do without the disruption of uprooting every weekend and won't go on bless her. She's going to stay at her mother's, which is a far more restful environment, I think, for her to study and prepare herself. So it's going to be just me and Zig for the next 3 weeks. But in 2 weeks' time, which is Father's Day in the UK, when both my girls are coming over. Hope you're all well. Cheers. Hope you've stuck with me thus far. And thank you for watching, as always. I appreciate it. And now I feel like Fidel Castro. Except I've got the hat. I'm going to go now. I'm probably going to knock something off, so I'm going to move that. Cheers everyone. Take care. Ta-da.